Special report. Our Lauren Ashburn is in Mexico, where migrants tell her why they want to enter the U.S. despite the dangerous journey. Papal plea. Our coverage comes as Pope Francis calls for an international response to the migrant crisis. Historic handover. The United States returns a rare copy of a letter written by Christopher Columbus to the Vatican. And not the usual song and dance. Soccer fans in Russia are ready for the World Cup. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 14th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. As tensions in Europe rise over the flow of migrants, Pope Francis is calling for an international response. It's an issue dividing U.S. lawmakers and Americans across the country. Tonight, in our continuing series on immigration, Lauren Ashburn travels to a small village north of Mexico City. It's where a Catholic-run shelter helps undocumented migrants, mostly from Central America, traveling north.
Pedro has traveled 48 days from Honduras to Huichapan. His feet are blistered, his back sore. Someone pushed him from the top of a speeding train. 2.5 hours north of Mexico City, trains stop here at a cement plant to unload.
It's migrants like the ones behind me coming from Honduras to the United States who get on trains like this. They climb up the stairs and hang on to the roof to make it to the United States.
During the journey, undocumented migrants stop at one of dozens of shelters run by the local Catholic Church. This is Casa de Peregrino.
Gracias por todo, Padre. En el nombre poderoso de Jesucristo te doy gracias. Amén y amén.
Where today several men from Honduras are given a meal and find a safe place to lie down before getting back on the train. They are only allowed to stay for 3 days.
I fight for every day, so I want to go United States. I don't got nothing in Honduras, you know.
Felipe made it once, 8 years ago.
Era como un sueño.
He tells me it was like a dream. He had to pinch himself, but he was deported. And since then, has traveled north more than 25 times. Every time, Mexico sent him back to Honduras.
So I want one future for my family, you know, so my country is really poor, you know, so I want to make money.
Cecilia Suarez runs Mexico's Catholic Relief Services Office. CRS is an international nonprofit that works with local churches. She says they help 100,000 Central American refugees every year.
These migrants are the ones more desperate because they are actually fleeing their countries due to poverty, to the increased violence in the Northern Triangle.
And the Northern Triangle is El Salvador, Guatemala
and Honduras.
The issue with immigration is that they are undocumented, that they are coming to the United States without a visa, and people in the United States say they will put a big burden on hospitals and on the government to pay for them. So how do you, in your mind, reconcile those two opinions?
Well, I think it's really complicated. No? Their own countries cannot afford, and they are not giving them the opportunity to have decent lives. Mexico is the most dangerous border in the world. The 3,000 kilometers that people need to cross from the south to the north are really dangerous. They are victims of kidnappings, assaults,
especially the women.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the women that leave their homes know that, well, almost all of them are going to be raped during the crossing.
They don't see it in terms of putting a burden on the United States at all. They see the United States as the land of the rich and of the plenty, and they want to go and make money.
Yeah, For them, it's the only possibility to increase their income, to be able to have a decent house, and to pay for the families that are staying at home.
2 undocumented Honduran migrants decided today is the day to leave. And like thousands before them, and thousands after them, saying goodbye to one of the few kindnesses they have known. Yet no matter how many times the Catholic missionaries say goodbye, it's always the same thought.
Ay, que Dios los cuide.
May God protect you.
Our thanks to Lauren Ashburn. She continues her reporting from Mexico tomorrow evening on EWTN News Nightly. You can see exclusive video and pictures on her Facebook and Twitter page. Meantime, back here in the U.S. Catholic bishops are challenging the president. They say the Trump administration's immigration policy could hurt families and women fleeing domestic abuse. The president says it's a matter of keeping Americans safe. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. When it comes to the issue of immigration, the White House says it's all about keeping the law. The Catholic Church recognizes the right to secure borders, but church leaders say immigrants have the right to life, and it's not being respected.
We cannot remain silent. This is really a crisis situation. And all of my experience in immigration, it's never been quite this bad.
U.S. bishops meeting in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, are reacting to policy coming out of the Trump administration. Earlier this week, Attorney General Jeff Sessions ruled immigration judges generally cannot consider domestic and gang violence as grounds for asylum.
Asylum was never meant to alleviate all problems, even all serious problems that people face every day all over the world.
Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, the president of the U.S. bishops, says the decision is a cause for deep concern because, quote, at its core, asylum is an instrument to preserve the right to life. The church teaches nations should welcome the foreigner, but a state also has the duty to enforce the law for the common good. The Catechism adds immigrants must obey the laws and bear civic burdens. For now, these leaders are concerned with keeping families together. Cardinal Joseph Tobin, Archbishop of Newark, suggests bishops go to the border and inspect the detention facilities where migrant children are being kept.
As a sign of our pastoral concern and our protest against this hardening of the American heart.
Bishop Edward Weisenberger of Tucson even asked if Catholics involved in the immigration crackdown should face penalties, although he didn't specify what they would be.
I think it's important to point out that canonical penalties are there in place to heal, first and foremost to heal, and therefore, for the salvation of these people's souls, maybe it's time for us to look at canonical penalties.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was pressed today on the immigration debate and whether it's moral to separate children from their parents. She said it's biblical to enforce laws, and she says that has been President Trump's mission since the day he took office. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Republicans and Democrats court Hispanic evangelicals ahead of the midterm elections. They covered immigration, abortion, as well as the power of prayer. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us from Capitol Hill. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Evangelicals from all over the nation gathered this morning for the National Hispanic Prayer Breakfast. Leaders from both parties didn't shy away from hot-button issues. For them, it's an opportunity to capture a slice of the American electorate.
Here at the National Hispanic Prayer Breakfast, faith and politics meet.
Hear our prayers in the midst of our world in conflict.
The House Democratic leader came out swinging.
This is the first time in recent history we have had a president who has not respected the dignity and worth of every person coming into our country.
But for decades, Nancy Pelosi has voted against pro-life bills, like the 20-week abortion ban. Today, Vice President Mike Pence reminded the crowd of the Trump administration's pro-life victories.
As we reinstated the Mexico City policy, denying any foreign aid dollars to organizations that promote or perform abortions, we withdrew the United States from the UN Population Fund, preventing our tax dollars from paying for forced sterilization and abortion around the world, and we empowered states to defund abortion providers.
Speaker Paul Ryan, who's retiring from Congress, praised the power of prayer and recalled what happened 1 year ago today when a shooter nearly killed Representative Steve Scalise on a Virginia baseball field.
Days like that, trials like that, when things like that happen, it kind of makes you think about what truly matters. They make you realize that we have so much to be thankful for. We have this precious gift of life that God has given us.
House Majority Whip Steve Scalise will be wearing a U.S. Capitol Police hat at tonight's congressional baseball game, and that's in honor of the 2 officers who saved him last year. Representative Scalise has gone through 9 surgeries since the attack. He still walks with the help of crutches. Wyatt?
Jason, it's one of those rare moments that brings Washington together, but next week's debate on immigration is not expected to be as friendly as is it?
Democrats and Republicans, and actually for that matter, conservative and moderate Republicans, are still far apart when it comes to immigration. Speaker Ryan today says he won't guarantee passage, and North Carolina Republican Walter Jones tells me he doesn't think either bill will pass.
We'll be carefully watching. Correspondent Jason Calvi. Thanks, Jason. The Justice Department issues a stinging rebuke of the FBI and former Director James Comey. It comes in a report into the Bureau's handling of the Hillary Clinton email case. An independent investigation calls Comey insubordinate and says his actions in the email case were extraordinary, but adds it found no evidence of political bias on his part. The report is the culmination of an 18-month review into one of the most important FBI investigations in recent history. Argentina's lower house of Congress passes a bill to legalize abortion up to 14 weeks.
131 votos fueron afirmativos.
The measure has roused fierce passions in the homeland of Pope Francis, and the vote was tight. The proposal now goes to the Senate. The president of the majority Catholic country says he will sign the bill if it reaches his desk. Right now, Argentina allows abortion only in cases of rape or risks to a woman's health. Police in Chile raid 2 Catholic church offices. It's part of an investigation into clergy sex abuse. The surprise move came hours before 2 Vatican representatives met with the country's attorney general. They discussed cooperation in the civil and church probes. The U.S. is returning a copy of a rare letter written by Christopher Columbus to its rightful home in the Vatican. The U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, Callista Gingrich, handed over the 500-year-old artifact to the Vatican's librarian and archivist. Columbus wrote the original letter to the King and Queen of Spain in 1493. For more on the Columbus letter, we turn to Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley, who joins us from Rome. Juliet, tell us more about this extraordinary document.
Wyatt, it's important to clarify that the letter is not the original, but one of 80 translations into Latin. It's known as the Columbus Letter from 1493, the year after he reached America. And in it, the Catholic explorer spread the news of the discovery of the New World. It was addressed to the Spanish royals, also devout Catholics, and it had been in the Vatican Library for centuries. Officials say the letter was probably stolen in the 1990s and replaced with a forgery.
Okay, so it was stolen then. How did the letter then end up in the United States?
Well, a private book collector from Atlanta bought the letter in 2004 for just under $1 million without knowing that it had been stolen. And 7 years ago, Homeland Security was alerted after an American scholar noticed the letter at the Vatican wasn't authentic. Now, Homeland Security officials managed to link the real letter to the book collector, who has died, and his widow has agreed to return it today.
Interesting how they were able to piece it all together. Do we know who stole the original from inside the Vatican Library?
Well, Wyatt, I asked Homeland Security that very question this morning at the Vatican Library, and here is what they told me.
We started discovering that some of these letters or manuscripts had been replaced by very skillful forgeries. By someone obviously that had the know-how and the skill and the access to some of these libraries to take the documents out. Obviously they're high-valued items for collectors.
So it could have been an inside job, but the U.S. authorities aren't confirming that, Wyatt.
Very interesting. So much history behind this. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up, a former Trump administration official gives us his take on the U.S.-North Korea summit. And we have a report from Fatima, one of the world's most famous Marian shrines. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is reassuring America's key Asian allies. He says the Trump administration will make sure North Korea keeps its promise to get rid of its nuclear weapons. Secretary Pompeo met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing today. It comes one day after detailed talks in Seoul with the foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan. Pompeo reiterated the U.S. will not consider lifting sanctions on North Korea until denuclearization is complete. He was in Singapore earlier this week for President Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un. Joining me now is Michael Anton, former National Security Council spokesman for the Trump administration and lecturer and research fellow at Hillsdale College. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Do you think Secretary Pompeo's visit will alleviate concerns that the U.S. has made concessions to North Korea?
Well, look, he's in a difficult spot. Think about who he's had to meet with. The Japanese, the South Koreans, the Chinese. They all have different interests there. Some of those governments, the Chinese government especially, would like to see the U.S. make concessions to North Korea. So that's not reassuring to the Chinese to hear that sanctions are still going to be on. Similarly, the South Korean government right now, obviously they have different interests than China, but they have a more liberal government, whereas the Japanese have a more conservative government. Mm-hmm. So of those three countries, the one that's most concerned, that doesn't want to see any pressure come off, is Japan. South Korea, with its more left-of-center government in power right now, actually wants to see some of the tensions ease, which means they want to see some of the pressure come off because they're the most worried about a crisis in the region. So keeping those three different players with all different interests together is a difficult job for him, but that's why he gets paid the big bucks as Secretary of State.
Right, what an interesting dynamic. South Korea and Japan are also worried about another issue, which is the joint military exercises between American troops and South Korean troops, especially the consideration as to whether or not, they've halted it right now. And is their concern valid?
Well, that's something, again, that the Japanese would like to see go forward and never be interrupted. A different South Korean administration, a right-of-center government in Seoul would probably be in the same boat there. However, the Moon administration is much more willing to scale these things back, again, because their interest is in seeing reduced tensions. They think that high tensions could lead to a crisis, which could lead to war, or something, or conflict that could be obviously very harmful to South Korea. So I think what the president did is essentially say, we'll suspend this, we'll put it on hiatus. We're not taking these things away. We can always do them again. And keep in mind that the major exercise, annual exercise that the United States does with South Korea every year is in the spring. And it already happened. So we just did it. So saying that we're not going to do the next one, which is in August, which isn't as significant, isn't much of a concession. The real question will be down the road if there hasn't been progress, if the United States keeps this moratorium on for many months, and that remains to be seen.
Critics of President Trump have really been hammering him in the media, especially when it comes to North Korea's record of human rights abuses and the fact that he met with Kim Jong-un, who has a pretty bad history on this. How do you think this compares to, for example, when President Obama met with Raul Castro, another human rights abuser, and it doesn't seem like President Obama got the same level of criticism? How do you compare, and why do you think that there was a difference between the two?
I think that, well, look, the president's critics are they have to grasp at some way to criticize him. Remember, the same people who are criticizing him now for meeting with Kim Jong-un are the ones who were saying 6 months ago that President Trump's rhetoric was too hot and was going to start a war or cause a conflict, and we should give diplomacy a chance. So now that he's giving diplomacy a chance, they're not going to just come around and become President Trump's best friends. They got to find another basis on which to criticize him. So they've chosen this. There's a big difference between Cuba and North Korea in that the last time Cuba was a nuclear threat to the United States was in the Kennedy administration in the early 60s. North Korea is a nuclear threat to the United States right now, which is why an urgent diplomatic track is being pursued, and why, while not ignoring human rights, the president talked about Otto Warmbier in his press conference after the summit. Now, that's a sore spot for the North Koreans. Essentially, their treatment of him in custody, and it resulted in his death. That's not something that they want to hear talked about. The president highlighted a North Korean defector who held up his crutches. Remember, this was a man severely injured by the North Koreans at the State of the Union. So he's shown a lot of light on North Korean human rights abuses. I think it's, understandable, or at least predictable, if unfair, for the president's critics to say, well, you went to the summit, you didn't solve all the human rights problems, therefore it just means that you don't care and you gave in. It's just politics.
Yeah, either way, it's like I said, it's going to take time for things to change in North Korea. Michael Anton, former National Security Council spokesman, lecturer, and research fellow at Hillsdale College. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Officials are renewing debate in San Francisco over removing a statue of St. Junipero Serra near City Hall. It depicts him blessing a Native American at his feet. Some activists say the work is demeaning and racist. The city's art commission voted to remove it in March, but it was overruled following an appeal. Up next, we mark the end of the Jubilee year at Fatima. And soccer fans in Russia are finding the perfect pitch for the World Cup. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Lawmakers in Portugal narrowly reject a proposal to legalize euthanasia and physicist-assisted suicide at the end of May. The deeply divisive issue is the latest point of friction between faith and politics in this predominantly Catholic country. The Portuguese parliament voted to permit abortion on demand in 2007 and same-sex marriage in 2010. For more analysis, we go to Fatima, Portugal, where Rome Bureau Chief Alan Holdren joins us. Alan, what are Catholics in Portugal saying about the euthanasia vote?
Well, Wyatt, it was such a close vote on such a divisive issue. Before the debate took place in Parliament, that came to a 115 to 110 vote against passing this proposal for the legislation to legalize euthanasia. The Bishops' Conference of Portugal distributed 1.5 million pamphlets in which they said that this would be a backward step for society. The Catholics here are saying that they're glad that this right to life was upheld, but they're also saying that in order to keep this legislation from passing into the future, they're going to have to get organized.
A recent Pew study sketches out a decline of faith across Europe. It found that the majority of Europe's Christians are actually non-practicing. How is Portugal faring?
Well, Portugal, Wyatt, has about an 83% population of Catholics, people identify as Catholics. That Pew study said that 38% say they go to church. That's above the average for Europe. It's a very Catholic-feeling country. To be here in Fatima in particular, I mean, the numbers are skewed because it is a Marian shrine here. But to go out and speak to people this week, we've spoken to people from a wide range of ages. We have been able to see that the young people are falling away. They've got issues of keeping them engaged in the Catholic life here. But there's also, as time goes on, they say that they come back to the church. So to have places like this shrine to come to, they say they're places of peace that bring them back to the faith.
Fatima is marking the 100th year since Mary appeared there to 3 young children. You're at the famous Marian shrine. We heard the bells earlier. Tell us what's going on there and what your experience has been like.
Well, Wyatt, we've been here for the last 5 days here at the shrine in Fatima. They had 9.4 million visitors last year. Many people have been here over the course of this last week. There were the June the 13th celebrations marking the anniversary of the second apparition of Our Lady to the Shepherd Children, which just took place right here behind us. There weren't that many people here, but it was a Wednesday, and it was also the feast of St. Anthony, for which there's a huge celebration in Lisbon because that's where he was born and raised. We've had this incredible experience of just seeing what the Catholic culture looks like here, deeply rooted in the faith, and there's a lot of hope here for the future of the church in Portugal.
It's incredible how many millions of people come to Fatima every year, just this small town. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief, reporting from Fatima, Portugal. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And finally tonight, a big day for soccer fans as the World Cup begins in Russia. But this year's lead up to the opening celebration was not the usual song and dance. Young players teamed with folk singers dressed in traditional costumes. They sent an encouraging message to the Russian squad before its opening match. It worked. Russia defeated Saudi Arabia 5-0. The 32-team tournament ends July 14th in Moscow. Unfortunately, the United States didn't qualify this year, but I'm sure there's lots of Americans who are going to be watching a number of the games both tomorrow and this weekend. And that concludes our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.